All right, well, we've got quite a few more people on the line now, so we're just going to go ahead and get started and just allow folks to come in as they can. I did get a small note earlier that said we did sound a little echoey, so if you do have any issues with the sound, feel free to just send us a message and we will do our best to adjust it. Hopefully it will work for everyone. But I think with that, we'll just kind of start diving right in. So I did want to welcome everyone to the HeatSmart Maps Program and Technology Overview webinar. My name is Lisa Dobbs. I'm also here with my colleagues Josh and Jonah, and we're going to give you a little sense of what the program's about, as well as the technologies involved. And what I'm also just going to do right now is just quickly go to the agenda. To outline what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to give you an overview of Mass CEC. We're going to talk about the HeatSmart Maps program. Then we're going to switch gears and talk about the specific technologies and some of their details. And then hold a section at the end for questions and answers. What we're going to do is we're going to keep everyone on mute, so feel free to keep yourselves muted. If you have any questions that come up at any point, just type them in the questions section. And we will also hold maybe 5 or so minutes after the program overview for programmatic questions. And we'll probably limit that to about 5 minutes just to keep moving so we can get also into the technology information. And also, if there aren't questions we're able to get to during the time frame, we will follow up with everyone and send the questions and answers as well as the slides. And this is also being recorded, so just some information for everyone. And with that, I think we will just jump right in. So a little bit about Mass CEC. Since we do have a variety of people on the call today who might not be familiar, we do just want to give a brief intro to who we are and what we do. We are a quasi-state public agency that works to grow the state's clean energy industry while helping to meet the Massachusetts clean energy, climate, and economic development goals. As of 2017, the Massachusetts clean energy sector employs more than 109,000 workers across the Commonwealth. Clean energy is an $11.4 billion industry in Massachusetts and represents 2.3% of the state's overall economy. We have 3 main activities. We invest in programs like HeatSmart that increase renewable energy adoption in our state. We connect participants in the clean energy sector together. For instance, we have placed over 3,000 clean energy interns over the last 8 years. And we also enable innovation. For example, we own and manage the Wind Technology Testing Center in Charlestown and the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal. Both of these facilities support our growing offshore wind industry in Massachusetts. If you have any other questions about Mass CEC, feel free to reach out to us afterwards. But that's just a nice little overview of who we are and what we do. And we mentioned HeatSmart Maps, that's what you're all here for today. So a brief summary of what HeatSmart Maps is. It is a group purchasing and community education program specifically targeted at clean heating and cooling technologies. It targets residential and small-scale commercial customers. And it really mainly relies on community volunteers for that group purchasing model, which we'll talk about in a minute. Speaking of models, this was originally based off of the Solarized Mass model, which again is that group purchasing and community education program. And also what's nice about the HeatSmart Maps program as well is it is going to integrate very well with the current rebate programs that we offer for those clean heating and cooling technologies. So in terms of what the group purchase model is, it essentially is a model that's going to help increase education and community outreach. It simplifies the process of installing these technologies through things like vetted installers and sort of a prepackaged type of program. It helps reduce installation costs, reduce time to contract, and also increase adoption. And really what this model is doing is addressing the market barriers that folks might find challenging with which to adopt these technologies. Things like cost, inertia towards signing a contract, or complexity. So when you have a group purchase model that has a competitive installer selection, for example, you have pre-vetted installers that you can be comfortable in going with, knowing that your community members selected them. You can have oftentimes a reduced cost because your community members and yourself as well, or other volunteers, are going to essentially be a marketing and outreach arm for your installer, and that's going to help them offer a lower cost to everyone. And because the program is a limited time offer, it helps move folks into adoption and has been proven to increase adoption as well. And just this visual on the right-hand side is just a visualization of what I just explained. It's just the idea that this group purchasing model and the leveraged group buying power and competitive installer selection and the outreach portion of this program help drive down that cost stack on various levels to help folks move forward with these types of installations. So for HeatSmart Maps, we definitely want to ask the question, why target heating? So heating represents about 1/3 of Massachusetts' energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, so that's pretty high. Now, when we take a look at these pie charts to the right here, we see that further broken down into individual household energy use, where we actually see almost 60% just to space heating alone. And then the rest of the pie is also towards different types of heating, whether or not you might heat also with electricity as well. So we have a high energy use due to heating and cooling. And then when you further break down how we are essentially obtaining that type of heat or cooling, you can see that right off the bat, natural gas is already over 51%, oil is almost 30%. So we're still at a very high level of high carbon fossil fuel type of heating fuels. So that's something that we need to be able to target. And so this is especially burdensome on both a carbon standpoint as well as a cost standpoint, because those high cost heating fuels, oil, electric, and propane, are very burdensome for Massachusetts households. In response to this, MassCEC made a 5-year commitment to support these clean heating and cooling technologies to help support trying to get at some of these issues. And we have a $48 million authorization for this initiative, which includes the HeatSmart Maps program. So when I mentioned high cost heating fuels, what you're going to see is that clean heating and cooling technologies offer the greatest savings for households that do have those high cost heating fuels. And this map represents the different percentages within communities and census tracts that have high cost heating fuels. So the more towards the red any of these communities or census tracts might be in, the more high cost heating fuels they have. So this is an important map for folks to look at when you're considering your application. It's not the only factor when considering your application, of course, but it's certainly a compelling factor. So be sure to take a look at this map and take that into consideration, as well as other reasons why, of course, your community might be successful in this program. So HeatSmart Maps, this is our second round. We launched last year with a pilot. There are currently 4 communities participating, which actually represents 7 total municipalities, because there are several that are in partnerships, and all of those are currently active. They launched at slightly different times last year, but we did want to offer some initial sort of results. None of the campaigns are finalized yet, but we wanted to give everyone a sense of where that pilot is thus far, so you could get a sense of what you might expect. So 2 of the 4 campaigns are near completion. They are ending August 31st. And thus far, those communities already have educated over 450 interested households and facilitated over 60 contracts for these systems. And again, they're ending in another month or so, and we also have 2 additional communities that are also participating that aren't represented in these numbers. So you can see how those numbers might grow within the next couple of months. So that gives you a sense of really the great success that we're already seeing with these community clean energy initiatives. So we wanted to get into a few high-level programmatic details to give everyone a sense of things you should consider when looking into this RFP. Applicant communities can select which of the 4 clean heating and cooling technologies that you want to promote. You can select one, and you can select up to all 4. That's up to your community as a part of your application, so be sure to note that. All cities and towns in Massachusetts are eligible. Why we bring this up is because this is based off the Solarized Mass program, and unlike Solarized Mass, everyone is eligible. In Solarized Mass, not every community is eligible. So keep that in mind, that it is open to the entire state. And this year we are opening it up. We're bringing it from 4 communities for the pilot to up to 6 communities or groups of municipalities this year. So keep that in mind as well. In terms of partnerships, we do recommend up to 3 and maybe no more than that. If you have a specific situation in which you'd like to consider doing more, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll discuss that individual situation with you. As another note, communities do not need to be designated green communities or have participated in Solarized Mass. Those might be helpful opportunities or volunteer bases from which to pull from, but you don't need those experiences to participate. Also, home energy audits are an important part of this campaign, especially because, generally speaking, most of the rebates, you need to have had that audit to receive that rebate. The application deadline for the community application is September 16th, and we'll also talk about the timeline in just another slide or two, but just wanted to bring that forth as a nice reminder to everyone, the amount of time and the amount of weeks that you might have to consider your application. So to give just a high-level overview of the level of support that Mass CEC offers, we provide a marketing budget of anywhere from $5,000 to $14,000 per community or groups of communities. Why it's a little bit of a bigger range this year is something that is detailed on page 5 of the RFP. But basically what that is outlining is that there are some additional types of categories of what we might call marketing grant adders that communities are eligible for. So be sure to take a look at the RFP and see the amount of funding that your community might be eligible for, not only to consider your application, but also if you believe that you're eligible for those, please make sure to look at those guidelines and specifically apply to those. Again, if you have any questions, definitely type that in. What Mass CEC is also going to do as a part of this process, we mentioned that competitive installer selection. We are going to issue that installer RFP on all of the community's behalf, and also contract with the selected installers, which the community themselves will select. We also will provide a technical consultant that's going to play a variety of roles, but the main functions that they're going to do is help your community evaluate and select that installer, especially from a technical perspective. They're going to help develop marketing and outreach materials, and also information to help volunteers identify residents who might be a good fit. So a good way to target those that could be likely to adopt these technologies or best benefit from these technologies. The consultant is also going to serve as a technical resource to your HeatSmart coach and other volunteers. So rest assured, you'll really have that technical backup. You don't need to be a technology expert yourself. The one thing that we will note is that once you get into the installation phase of any particular program, Mass CEC does expect that the installer that you've selected will serve as that technical expert because they're going to be hands-on on any of those individual installations. So just things to keep in mind as to types of support we offer. But again, please review that RFP in detail to look at some of the other things that we will offer, as well as the technical consultant. So again, just a reminder on the timeline. You do see this in the RFP, but we did release this RFP back in July. One important note is to note when you want to submit your community questions by. We want to get them in by August 9th. That way we can get them posted on our website live for everyone by the 16th. And why we want to do that is to give everyone, again, another month before that application is due to take a look at some of the questions that communities might have asked that might be relevant to you. I will note that that does not mean you cannot submit questions after that, but it would be to your benefit to submit them by that original deadline. But again, feel free to reach out to HeatSmart Maps at masscec.com at any time with any of those questions. And just another reminder that that deadline again is September 16th, 2018 by 11:59 p.m. There's a lot of available resources on masscec.com/HeatSmart. And again, questions at HeatSmartMass@masscec.com. And with that, in mentioning questions, that is pretty much the high-level overview of the program itself. What I want to do is just open it up quickly to see if there aren't any specific programmatic questions. So one question that's quick and easy to answer, it was just about the pilot itself. Can we please share what communities are currently participating? We have the partnership of Bolton and Harvard. We also have the partnership of Concord, Carlisle, and Lincoln. We also have the community of Nantucket, as well as the community of Great Barrington. Those are the communities that are currently participating. So another good question. So will communities be punished if they do not apply jointly with other communities? Of course not. Communities absolutely can apply on their own. The only thing to keep in mind is just to take a look at the eligibility parameters. If your community doesn't meet the minimum amount of households that we are interested in seeing, then you'll want to consider applying with another community to be able to meet that minimum. So again, you can apply as a group or individually, but definitely take a look at those eligibility details. And if you have any specific questions on the unique situation for your community, feel free to email us and we will definitely get back to you on that and talk about your individual situation. So another question, if communities partner with each other, how does that impact the marketing budget? So when communities partner, every community is eligible for their own marketing budget. So if you apply as a grouping of three, each of those three communities, which are individually municipalities, you will be able to be eligible for the individual budget.
So we've also had a few questions about rebates and incentives, and those will be covered in the next section of the presentation.
So another question is anticipated timing of the actual program implementation, 2018, 2019. Much like this year, it can range a little bit depending on if there are any delays with the community launch. But generally speaking, what you will see is the selection of the communities in 2018 and likely the implementation or really the launch and sign up phase of these programs starting in early 2019. So there's another good question here. Does each selected community pick one installer, or will there be a pool of installers for the community? So that's a very good question, and it is going to vary on the community. So a community or a grouping of communities can pick one installers. However, if there are installers that choose to apply as a partnership, and that is a pre-formed partnership, not a post-application partnership, that is also something that is eligible. So your community could look at those various options if that's something that comes up as a part of the application process. Sure, so I'm taking a look here, I got a couple of notes here, and I think there's a couple of questions that might go in well with each other. A lot of folks are just generally asking about timeline. And I think one of the best things to look at is there is a timeline on the RFP that's going to give a general sense of how the timeline of this program ideally will go or generally will go. But what you're going to basically look at is there's going to be several weeks for community selection, and that will start in September, and then you'll look into later in the fall when the communities will be announced. Once communities are announced, we're going to launch that installer RFP. That's also going to be a 1 to probably 3 month process. So that is going to take us into late winter, early spring. Once the communities have selected their installer, generally speaking, what we would call the sign-up period of the program is going to be anywhere from about 4 to 6 months. So when you think holistically about this entire time frame, you're looking at probably applying in late 2018 and likely your program ending in the end of summer 2019 or maybe early fall of 2019, again, depending on any hiccups or different things that may happen. And then what you're also going to consider, as well as a participating community, is the time frame that you may also have the relationship with the installer, or the installation time frame, which will happen towards the end of the sign-up period and the year following. So just keep that in mind. It's not largely intensive after that. That's just something to keep in mind, that you may need to be in contact with the installer after that. And your community members will also be in contact with your installer that following year as well, to talk about their individual situations. I think I'll just do probably one or two more questions just so we can keep with our time frame. But one question is more of an installer-specific question. But how do installers get on the list to be selected? That's a great question. So one of the best things that an installer can do to get on the list to be selected is get on our website and also get on our email lists in order to receive the RFP information for when that gets launched. That's going to give you all of the information on the RFP itself. And then beyond that, all you have to do is read the eligibility requirements and apply. So those are the two main ways. And so when I talk about the email lists, you want to sign up for our Clean Heating and Cooling Technologies list, as well as our Active Solicitations list. And those, then you will get an email blast from us when that RFP launches. But always feel free to continue to check the HeatSmart Maps website. And that's also going to give you an indication of when it gets launched, the due date, as well as any of the other information about any type of deadline or eligibility. So as long as you read that up on that and apply, that's how you're going to be eligible to be selected. So I think with that, we will probably move on. I think we addressed largely most of them, but again, like I said, we are tracking these questions, so if there's anything that we did not cover, we will definitely follow up and give everyone an overall Q&A, so all of the questions and all of the answers, though we may combine some just for efficiency's sake. But in the interest of your time, we will move on. But again, even if there are questions that you have that are on this, this portion of the RFP, feel free to continue to type those in as well. We may not necessarily address them at the end, but we will separately address them for you. So we will try not to let any question go unanswered. So thank you for those questions. I thought those were really helpful. And what we're going to do now is move on to the technology portion. So I'd like to introduce Josh Kessler. He's going to talk to you about some of the technologies that will be as a part of this program.
All right, thanks, Lisa. So the HeatSmart program supports 4 different technologies: air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, modern wood heating, also known as biomass pellet boilers, as well as solar hot water or solar thermal technology. So I'm going to explain the technologies, how they work at a high level, some of the benefits, which homes or sites lend themselves best to these technologies, and then discuss some of the available incentives. And then Jonah is going to do the same thing for modern wood heat and solar hot water. So starting off, we support cold climate air source heat pumps. Those are on the top right. Ground source heat pumps on the bottom left. Modern wood heating systems, which you see pictured on the top left there. And then solar hot water systems, which you can see on the roof on the bottom right. So starting off with air source heat pumps, these are sort of the most common technology that we see installed through this program. The way the technology works, so these are also known as ductless heat pumps or mini splits. Heat pumps work by moving thermal energy or heat from one location to another. Now, an air source heat pump can extract energy from the outside air and move it through a refrigerant pipe to provide heat indoors, or vice versa. If it's in cooling mode, it will move heat from the inside of the building to the outside. Now, because they're moving heat instead of because they're moving heat, it's a passive process, and they can generate more thermal energy than just electric resistance heating. Now, they generate heat. They can operate even when it's very cold outside, 0 degrees or even colder. And in particular, the modern cold climate units that we support operate very efficiently down to very low temperatures. And again, they work for both heating and cooling. Traditionally, they have been sort of a supplemental technology, or they have been used during the shoulder seasons. But recent advances in engineering have made them a much better cold climate technology. So what you see pictured here are 3 different outdoor heat pump units and 3 indoor units. This, I believe, is a project in Northfield, Massachusetts. On the left hand, you have the outdoor compressors. They're typically mounted 12 to 18 inches off the ground to ensure that they're mounted above the snow line, so that during the winter, the units aren't covered up by snow. Then the indoor units, the most common configuration we see are wall-mounted units, like you see on the right. You also have floor-mounted units or other indoor options. And just something to note, they can be either single-head or multi-head units, where a single-head unit, you just have 1 outdoor compressor and 1 indoor unit coupled with that. For multi-heads or multi-splits, you'll have 1 outdoor compressor with multiple indoor units attached to that. Now, we've had some questions about what incentives are available. So there are 4 incentives currently available across Massachusetts. The first is our own rebate at MITC. These offer up between $500 and $2,000 per home, and it's based on either the number of number of outdoor units or the capacity of the outdoor units, depending on the type of unit. MassSave, the utility-run efficiency programs, offers an additional incentive on top of that, and that's $100 to $300 based on the number of indoor heads. That's $100 to $300 per indoor head installed. There's also something called an alternative energy credit, and that for air source heat pumps, that primarily promotes whole home systems. So it's really only if you're installing a system that covers the entire heating load of a home that you would see that. And the amount of the incentive varies, so I'm not going to get into too much detail on how that works. Now, finally, the MassSave program also offers the heat loan, and that's a 0% financing option up to 7 years, covers up to $25,000 in energy efficiency costs. So just to give you a sense of the scale of these incentives, between the MITC and MassSave rebates, this typically covers about 15 to 25% of the total installed costs of the system. And both of those rebates are subject to change in 2019. There are also higher incentives available for both low and moderate income customers. And then the heat loan, to give you a sense of that, typically is sufficient to cover the costs of an air source heat pump system once you factor in the rebates. Now, the benefits of an air source heat pump, first of all, they're very versatile. They can be deployed almost anywhere. They provide both heating and cooling depending on where you are in the season. So the cold climate models, again, can provide very efficient heating down below 0 degrees throughout the winter. They're also a very good cooling solution, especially for homes with no ductwork, extremely efficient for cooling. And then they also provide dehumidification when they're in cooling mode. So they really provide very good comfort. The strength of the technology, one of the strengths of the technology is their zonal control. So they can heat one room or one zone with each indoor head, which is provides very good comfort, and then is also a very efficient solution because they have that very good zoning capability. They can also be controlled through smartphone apps or other typically remote controls located in the room along with the indoor units. And because you don't have ductwork, you're not moving very much air through the building, they're much quieter than a typical heating or air conditioning system. What makes for a good site? First of all, they really require very little space. You just need a few feet for the outdoor units, which need to be located above the snow line or mounted above the snow line. And then the indoor units, you saw the pictures there, they can be wall mounted or floor mounted. And again, you don't need any ductwork. You see the best paybacks for sites, first of all, that are using high cost heating fuels, so especially electric resistance, but also oil or propane. And then if you have below average electricity costs, particularly if they're paired with solar PV, then you're really going to minimize the cost of operating the heat pump. And again, because they don't require any ductwork, if the alternative that you're considering is installing central air conditioning, that ductwork can be expensive. So if you're installing a ductless heat pump, then you're cutting out the cost of installing ductwork, and that can be a very good option. That can really be a no-brainer for a lot of those sites. And finally, to use them as a sole source of heating, the home really should be very well insulated, a tight envelope, minimal air infiltration, and just generally an efficient home. So they're very good and very common for supplemental heating and for cooling, but if you are looking to use them as a sole source of heat for your whole home, it does need to be a really tight envelope. Now, moving on to ground source heat pumps, there are two different basic types of systems. There are closed loop systems and open loop systems. So closed loop are more common. The typical configuration are what's called vertically bored closed loop systems. And what that means is a specialized drill rig will be brought in to drill a hole about 300 to 600 feet, one or more boreholes 300 to 600 feet into the ground. And then a plastic pipe will be installed in that borehole. And the heat pump will pump heat through the pipes down several hundred feet into the ground through the supply pipe, and then return through the return pipe. And essentially it will pick up heat from the ground as the water antifreeze mixture is pumped through those pipes. So this is an extremely efficient process because the ground tends to remain at around 50 degrees year round. So that the water antifreeze mixture is picking up heat as it's pumped through the ground. And it's typically more efficient than an air source heat pump because that water because the ground stays at a constant temperature. Now with open loop systems, you're actually exchanging water directly with an underground well or aquifer. So you'll have a supply pipe and a return pipe, and the water will typically be returned at right around 50 degrees at that ground temperature. So we see fewer of these systems. You tend to, the sites where this can be installed, it's a little bit more limited, but it is an extremely efficient process where we do see it. These images are just a couple examples of, on the left you see one of the drill rigs that I mentioned. It's actually drilling a hole and then installing that PVC pipe into the ground. And then on the right, you see an actual heat pump unit located in a basement with the ductwork coming out of it. Now, getting to the incentives, the MITC rebate is currently up to $10,000. On top of that, there is a federal tax credit that covers 30% of the system costs. And then the alternative energy credits. We actually do see that most of the systems coming in now are eligible for the alternative energy credits because ground source is typically a whole home heating and cooling system. And then again, the Mass Save Heat loan is applicable. 7 years, 0% financing, up to $25,000. So between the Mass Save rebate and the federal tax credit, that typically covers roughly 40 to 50% of the project costs. And our rebate will be subject potentially to changes in 2019. Now there are higher incentives, again, for low and moderate income customers. And then the heat loan, typically, for many systems, that $25,000 is enough to cover the balance of the system that is not covered by the rebate and the federal tax credit. For some larger systems, there is some additional cost on top of that. Now, turning to the benefits, again, it is the most efficient of all of the four clean heating technologies that we are offering through HeatSmart. So you're going to maximize your energy savings as well as your emissions reductions. And then solar PV array can offset a significant portion of your electric energy use. Now, a single unit, just like any heat pump, provides both heating and cooling. It will dehumidify when it's in cooling mode. And most systems also provide supplemental domestic hot water, maybe 50 to 60% of the domestic hot water load throughout the course of the year. It also tends to have sophisticated controls. You can control them often through a smartphone or through a laptop interface, as well as a thermostat on the wall. And some of the systems are coupled with actually software packages where you can get a really detailed breakdown of your energy use and how the system is operating throughout the year. Another of the benefits is that, so the heat pumps themselves tend to last about 20 to 25 years, but the loop field for a closed loop system will often last 50 years or more. They're plastic pipes installed in the ground, so really a long-term asset that can add to the value of the home. There's also once the loop field is installed, there's no outside heating equipment required. So it can be good for historical buildings, for example, and a minimal visual impact. It's also, provides excellent comfort, and there's relatively little noise associated with it. So what makes for a good site? Typically, they use forced air distribution systems for both heating and cooling. And then they can also be coupled with hydronic heating systems, such as radiant floors on the heating side. And then homeowners, so typically we see homeowners who install this are looking to make long-term investments in their home. So because it can be a higher cost system, it can be a longer term payback, but again, the systems last a very long time, and they really do provide excellent energy savings over the life of the system. So we see the best paybacks, again, at sites with high cost heating fuels, sites with significant cooling needs because they're so efficient for cooling as well as heating, and then again, below average heating costs, for example, coupled with solar PV. So required space available. It does require, there's some, okay, so first of all, in the basement, there is, you need to install a heat pump, typically in the basement, just like you would a boiler or a furnace. For open loop systems, a vertical borehole, typically you'll have 1 to 3 wells at a site, and they're typically located 20 to 30 feet from the house and spaced about 20 feet apart from each other. An open loop system requires an underground well or aquifer. And then I didn't really explain in detail, but there are also horizontal loop systems. These are also closed loop systems, typically located about 10 feet below the ground. And they can be installed, instead of using specialized drilling equipment, they can be installed, you just use a typical standard excavator, basically, to dig that trench. But the trenches are very large. We're talking 150 feet by 150 feet. So four of these systems would cover a football field. And sorry, I'll try to speak up a little bit. So 4 of these systems would cover a football field. Where you do have space for these horizontal systems, it can be a good option because they're lower cost, basically, because you don't require that specialized drilling equipment. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonah now, who's going to talk about modern wood heating. And there will be plenty of time for questions at the end on the technologies.
Thanks, Josh. So yes, I'm Jonah. I'm administering the modern wood heating and solar hot water programs, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of those 2 technologies. So modern wood heating is unlike the old wood stoves or wood boilers you might have heard of. In fact, we have programs to get those older systems out of people's homes. Modern wood heating covers fully automated systems that function very similar to boilers you might have or I'm sure you have seen before. As you can see from this little supply chain diagram, this is a deliverable fuel. A truck will come and pump wood pellets into a storage unit, and then in your home you have a system that transfers those pellets to heat and stores it in a tank for maximum efficiency, after which it's distributed through an existing or a newly installed water distribution system within your home. Let's see. Ooh. So first let's talk about the fuel. Wood pellets are available for delivery across Massachusetts. The systems are generally sized so that you only need a delivery a couple of times a year, and that just depends on the size of the storage tank that you opt for. These pellets are made of locally sourced materials. Specifically, they are the byproducts of scraps from paper mills, sawmills, stuff that's currently waste. And on the supply side, there are some very strict sustainability requirements to ensure that this is the renewable fuel that Massachusetts designates it to be. As you can see on the right, we have a little bit of a certificate to show the caloric value and various sort of compositional details about pellets. This quality assurance measure exists for all pellets that are delivered, and they help us track the fuel and like I said, ensure that they're of high quality. So some of the benefits of a modern wood heating system. The prices of pellets are very stable and are consistently lower and generally lower than oil prices, which fluctuate significantly and also are far from the sort of locally supported and locally sourced economic value that you see with pellets. It's a very simple retrofit if you have a hot water heating system like an oil boiler, if you have radiator or something like that. We'll get into some of the factors that make a system or your home ideal for modern wood heating. But in general, it's a very simple retrofit. And in addition to space heating, they also provide hot water. And like I said before, it's automated with few deliveries. Essentially turn on your thermostat and you have heat. And like I said as well, it's a locally sourced material. It supports local forestry jobs and increases the value of sustainable forestry in the state. So here's an example project. On the left, you can see a delivery occurring. There's a little hose that sucks the pellets into your storage tank, which is that central photo. It's a fairly large bag. One of the things you have to make sure if you're interested in this technology is that your home has enough space for a storage unit like that. There's sometimes bags, there's sometimes small silos, and eventually those pellets will end up into the boiler, which is what you see on the right. That has the boiler and the water tank combined in one, so your thermal storage is all packaged together. And that system happens to be a Maine Energy system, which is a boiler that's built in the state of Maine. So now let's get into some of the incentives. The incentives for modern wood heating tend to be fairly generous. We offer up to $12,000 depending on the cost of the system. And like Josh mentioned before, the alternative energy credits vary depending on the amount of thermal energy you're producing. We also have mass save heat loans, which in this for this technology tend to cover the net remaining cost for most systems. In general, people should expect about 40 to 50% cost offset from this full sort of subsidy package. And there are higher incentives available for low and moderate income households. One other note is that for homes that currently have a wood heating system, a wood boiler that is, whether or not it's an outdoor hydronic heater or an indoor hydronic heater that is powered with wood, we offer an additional $6,000 for the replacement and disposal of those systems if you are installing a new modern wood heating system instead. So what makes a good site? In addition to, for those people who already have wood heating systems, it's an easy retrofit, like I said, if you have a hot water distribution system. So if you have a boiler already, There are furnace options available. There's one in particular that is already certified, but in general, your options are more limited if you have a forced air distribution system. You need a bit of space for both the boiler and tank, and for that storage bag or the storage unit that we showed a photo of previously. And if you currently heat with a high-cost fuel, your payback time will be better. All right, so now let's move into solar hot water. Solar hot water is a fairly simple technology. In essence, what you're doing is heating a fluid that then heats water in a thermal storage tank, in a insulated hot water tank. And then that hot water is pumped to the various places you might need it in your house. These systems tend to supply 50 to 80% of your annual hot water needs. And oftentimes there's a little bit of confusion about what the solar collectors are, that little rectangle on the top of the roof. This is totally separate from a solar PV system. There's no electricity involved. There's no grid interconnection. This is essentially the same as if you leave a hose out in the sun for a long time and then the water becomes scalding hot. You just put a fluid up on your roof where the sun can heat it, and then that heat from that into that fluid is transferred into the hot water that you're going to use in your home. There are three main components of these systems, as you can sort of see from that schematic right there. You have the collector, which I just described. You have the tank, which is insulated and sized to carry about a day's worth of hot water in it. And then you'll have a backup system, because these systems only heat about 50 to 80% of your hot water needs. You'll have either an integrated system that comes with your tank, that's usually electric powered, or you can tie it into your existing system if you really like your direct hot water system you have currently, or something like that. So it's very flexible in that way. Here are some example projects. On the left, you can see these are all flat plate collectors. There are other types of collectors as well. This is the one that's most common and most popular for residential systems. On the left, you can see a typical roof mount. Just to note, that is a very large system. You don't need that much space to have a full home hot water system. That one's quite large. On the top right, you can see an awning mount. So if you don't have the best roof space for it, you can also have an awning mount, as you see on the top there. And then below that, you can see the size comparison of a PV system compared to a solar hot water collector system. As I'll discuss in a little bit, these systems are much more efficient, so you need a lot less surface area to cover your hot water needs compared to solar electricity. So now let's talk about some of the incentives. The incentives for solar hot water are perhaps our most generous subsidy package. There's a basic rebate of up to $3,500 plus a 30% federal tax credit, and that tax credit is good until the end of 2019, after which it will start declining. I believe for 2020 it'll be at about 22 or 24%, but it's going to be gradually stepped down in the few years after 2019. Then there's a $1,000 state tax credit available from Massachusetts. Again, you have alternative energy credits that vary based on your thermal production, and the remaining costs are covered or can almost always be covered by a Mass Save heat loan. These incentives cover more than 50% of the projects in most instances. And again, there's the caveat that our programs may be subject to change in 2019. Just like our other programs, we also have additional adders for low income and moderate income customers. The one other adder we have for solar hot water is we have an extra $500 if you already have a solar PV system. And that will make this an especially economical option. So now let's talk about some of the benefits. In essence, this is a very efficient system. You're not having to transfer solar energy into electrical energy. You're just able to take the heat from the sun directly and put it straight into your house. And that means you need much less surface area to have a full home system. Like I said before, there's an additional $500 if you also have a solar PV system on your roof. And because it's just a hot water system, there's no interconnection. You don't have to organize this through your utility company. and it can integrate into your existing solar hot water system, or like I said, it can come with its own backup. So what makes a good site? Consistent with all of our programs, the more expensive your heating costs are, the easier and the sooner the payback will be. In addition to that, there are a few technical requirements. You need about 50 square feet of area. That could be either on your roof, it could be a ground mounted system, which we sometimes see, or it can be an awning mount like we saw in that photo previously. You need a bit of space available for your storage tank, but that storage tank is generally not any different from the size of a normal hot water tank that you might already have in your house. Southern exposure is good. You don't need exactly the same kind of exposure that you need for electricity due to the sizing and the winter usage and some technical details. But in general, it's both more efficient and more tolerant of shade. That said, you need about 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight per day. One other note is that these solar hot water systems can also be used for space heating, especially as tied into an existing boiler distribution system, hot water distribution system. We don't see this very commonly, very regularly, but it is definitely possible to also use this solar thermal technology to heat your house as well, in addition to your hot water. So I think that pretty much covers it. We're gonna open it up to some questions for the remaining time in the webinar, I believe, unless you, Josh, or Lisa have anything else to add.
I will add one thing as while we look through the questions. I did see, a question about kind of asking what is PV. I do know that it was answered, but I think that, just one thing that I wanted to mention is, obviously that is not a part of this program. So if your community is interested in a program that is like this and are really, really interested in PV, obviously we're here to promote HeatSmart. If anyone has an interest also in PV, you may want to consider looking into the Solarize Mass Plus program, which is one that might pair solar PV and one of these technologies. But again, we certainly want to promote this, but just keep that in mind if you do have that strong interest in PV.
Some other questions that we've had, is this program specifically focused on residential customers, or are commercial and industrial customers eligible also? So the HeatSmart program is specifically focused on the residential market, although I believe that small businesses are also eligible. MITC and MassSave also offer incentives targeted at the C&I market as well. If some of you are interested in those programs, feel free to reach out to us with questions. Another question that came up is, does our climate need cold climate heat pumps? So in short, the answer that the state has come up with is yes. In the Massachusetts climate, if we're targeting heating, these units the performance of an air source heat pump tends to drop off significantly once it gets down to, say, 30 degrees. And you certainly have a lot of days where it's going to be colder than 30 degrees, and that's, of course, when you need the most heating. So the cold climate heat pumps that qualify for the MITC rebates and other incentive programs have similar requirements. Those units have been vetted to ensure that they will operate efficiently and provide a significant amount of heat in our local climate. So yes, the MITC rebates, are they available regardless of utility, was one question. So the MITC rebates, much like the MassSave incentives, are only available to customers in investor-owned utility electric territories. So that means Eversource, National Grid, or Unitil electric territory, as well as the 5 municipal light plants that are paying into the Renewable Energy Trust.
And I will tack on to that as well. I do believe that we address this in the RFP, because obviously this is open to those that aren't in investor-owned utilities. or ones that pay into the trust, and you are of course still eligible, what you'll want to do is consider what your municipality offers as a package and discuss that with your municipality to see if there isn't something that your community either already offers or may a program that you may be interested in pairing with this program to make it as financially viable as others. That's definitely something to consider, and there are details about that in the RFP. So be sure to speak to your your local municipal plant and your municipality about those details.
That said, it does not preclude you from participating in HeatSmart at all if you are part of an MLP. One of our most successful municipalities has a municipal light plant, and they're doing very well.
And just to tack onto that, I did see a question about, okay, why is it available to all mass and the PV programs exclude towns with municipal lighting plants? And it's simply a function of where the funding is coming from. This particular program has funding from a couple of sources which are able to then cover those municipal lighting plants. Otherwise, the solar PV programs are only coming from the Renewable Energy Trust and so are therefore only eligible. So it's unfortunately, it's a little bit of a technicality there, but we're glad that we're able to offer this for municipal lighting plants. Maybe one day in the future we'll be able to expand that, but that's where it does stand right now.
So there are a couple questions about the Mass Save Heat loan for municipal lights. To my knowledge, that is not available to municipal lights. It's possible that certain MLPs have their own offerings, and certainly if, as part of the HeatSmart program, they were interested in establishing those offerings, we would be very interested in that. Having said that, their manufacturers often offer some sort of financing solution, though typically not the sort of zero financing deal that you're going to get through the heat loan. As well as home equity loans are another option that tends to provide relatively favorable financing terms.
Yeah, and I can build off that as well. Josh brings up a good point that if you take a look in the RFP, we have a section that we refer to called I think it's in either an eligibility or in another section where we encourage folks that are applying to consider teaming. So looking at your surrounding community assets and consider who you might also be able to bring into your partnership. And one of our suggestions is a local financial institution. So that might be something that if your community or surrounding communities may have a great local bank that might be interested in participating in a community-based program like this and may be able to offer a special loan package. That's something to consider as well. So definitely consider those types of conversations when you're considering that application, as that'll certainly help improve your application as well as probably the program on the whole to be able to offer that to communities. And that also does not exclude those that may be eligible for Mass Save. Consider those pairings as well because it would put together a good package.
There's also a question here, what is PV? That's solar photovoltaic. And just if anyone is confused, the difference between solar photovoltaic versus solar thermal is that the solar thermal system, which we're supporting through this program, provides hot water, typically just domestic hot water, though there are a few systems out there that provide heat as well, whereas a solar PV system provides electricity. We have a question about maintenance costs for each technology or maintenance requirements. As long as these systems, so as a generalization, as long as these systems are well maintained, there's minimal maintenance required. So certainly heat pumps have a reputation for having low maintenance costs as long as they're properly installed and maintained by the system owner. So for example, for an air source heat pump, that might mean changing out the filter periodically. But besides that, the requirements are pretty minimal. Certainly for solar hot water systems, there's minimal requirement. Also, you might have to shovel them off in the winter. for biomass heating systems, modern wood heating systems, also relatively low.
Yeah, they're very low. And I think if there is maintenance needed, often the person who's coming for the pellet delivery can take a look at your system then. So it doesn't require sort of any consistent expenditure separate from your deliveries.
And we have some questions about specific homes here. We encourage you to reach out through our website if you want to talk about what options might be good for your particular home. There's also a question about our wood stove changeout program, and glad that you mentioned that. So our wood stove changeout program has been run, we've run this for several years. It is for wood stoves that were manufactured 1990 or earlier, so older wood stoves with higher emissions that are not EPA certified. And we're offering incentives of anywhere from $500 to $3,000 per system to cover the cost of changing out the old one and replacing it with a new wood or pellet boiler. So that program is currently slated to run through the end of August, although it may be extended into September.
One other note about maintenance costs. During our installer selection process, we'll also be evaluating their sort of warranty guarantees. So part of the HeatSmart program is making sure that as much as is possible is covered under that installer selection process.
We have a question: can air source or ground source heat pumps or wood boilers be paired with solar hot water at one house? Yes, absolutely. And certainly heat pumps plus solar hot water are often a very good pairing. We also have a question on, do pellets create any carbon outputs to the air or waste that needs to be disposed of? There's a small amount of waste as a result, basically just ash, that needs to be disposed of when the pellets are burned. Regarding carbon output to the air, the idea behind this is that this is a renewable source where the pellets come from forests that are, of course, another carbon sink. So the exact carbon footprint of wood heating technology is up for debate, but there has certainly been a lot of research that has gone into this, and the state has concluded after significant research that this is a clean technology regardless of the exact amount of carbon emitted throughout the life cycle.
And the disposal of the ash involved with pellets is simply taking about a 5-pound tray out of your system and dumping it outside. It makes good fertilizer, that sort of thing. It's not something that requires a professional disposal or anything like that. It's simply emptying a tray once a year or something like that.
So there's a question about ground source heat pumps. Are they good for just larger buildings or for single family homes also? That's a good question. We often see them in larger homes, but they are certainly a good solution for any home really 2,000 square feet or up. We'd recommend. That's sort of our rough guideline. But again, there are some site-specific considerations to think about. Have air source heat pump water heaters been considered for this program, and why were they not included? So heat pump water heaters, it's a somewhat different technology where typically they're located in a basement or other indoor area, and they rely on waste heat from a boiler or furnace to provide the heat source. So because of that, we're really looking at systems that can ultimately be fossil-free, rely on fossil-free electricity, and because of that, they have not been considered in this program.
Yeah, and I can add to that as well, because this question did come up in the last round. Part of the reason is just very logistic as well, since that's just not something that we cover in our rebates. And we want to really make this very complementary. So we want to be able to have communities be able to offer a really good package for their participants. So they weren't included mainly for that reason as well. In addition, that's something that if you do want to still consider those, it certainly wouldn't be precluded to ask a selected installer if that's something that they might be interested in offering. You just, there just may not be an available rebate, so it just might not be as beneficial to a customer. But it's certainly not permitted by any means. So just that's something to keep in mind there.
So we have a question. Why wouldn't we all go to ground source heating? I like the phrasing there, but essentially first of all, there are some site-specific considerations that can drive up the costs for certain systems. And I won't get into detail on that, but certainly that's something worth bringing up with installers. Having said that, it is an excellent technology, extremely efficient, and ultimately very low emissions. Very strong savings over time, so glad to hear you're excited about it.
Yeah, and I think I'll build off that as well. One of the main reasons why we want to do this type of model of program is not only to get folks to install these things, but also just to spread the word about these technologies that people just might not even be aware of. So we certainly would love everyone to go to ground source if they can. So that's what's an amazing benefit to this program. Like we mentioned about the pilot, over 450 people have already learned in one way or another so far in this program. So being able to reach those folks to be able to do that is a big benefit of the program and something to definitely consider.
So we have another question. Are these technologies mostly for end-of-life replacements or for retrofits of working equipment? So that's a good question. Through the HeatSmart program, the majority of the program, the majority of the projects that we saw through our first round, our pilot round, were end-of-life replacements or else supplemental air source heat pumps, supplementing the heating capacity of an existing boiler or furnace. Having said that, especially for new construction, you tend to have tighter building envelopes, and heat pumps can be a great option for that. It can be a great option for new construction. And then in terms of working equipment, certainly if customers are interested in replacing working equipment, the earlier, before their end of life, we'd love to see that. Obviously the economics are improve over the closer the existing equipment is getting to the end of its life.
So there's a question, can financial incentives based on the amount of installations be used to create a community-wide incentive such as the tiers in solarized mass? That's a fantastic question. Although there aren't any specific tiers in the HeatSmart Maps program because costs can really vary, and it's a little bit more challenging to do so and really line that up. That's a really great opportunity and a question to have when communities get selected and have those discussions with their installers. That's a great discussion to have to see if you might not be able to do some community-specific ones. So if your community, for example, gets selected and you want to talk to your installer about, hey, if we are able to get 20 contracts, is there something that you might be willing to offer? A lower cost or perhaps a donated system or something along those lines, depending on what the installer might be able to offer. So that's that is a really good tool, like you're mentioning, and Solarize to get community members to sign up. That way everyone can receive a greater benefit. So that's absolutely something to consider. Again, it won't be upfront, but it's one of those things that you can really talk about with the team you're applying with, as well as when you start having those discussions with installers as well.
So we have one more question about solar hot water. Let me see, I can't quite read that. Is solar hot water only applicable when an existing hot water heater needs replacing? Like with any of our systems, sometimes the economics are better when a new system is needed, but no, it is not the case that you need to have a system near the end of its life. Like we mentioned before, solar hot water can be integrated into your existing system, and you will always have a secondary system at some point. So if you already have one that works great, then that's even better for the installation of the system.
There was also one question earlier, just as we're sort of wrapping up with the questions. Feel free to, of course, keep continuing to put them in because we're available again for another 15 minutes, and we will certainly make ourselves available for that time. But there was a question asked earlier, will we send these questions and answers out to everybody? And the answer is yes. Even if they are the ones that we answered on the webinar, we will send them out. There's another question that just came in as well. Will the technical consultant provided to selected communities be Mass CEC staff or from a third party? The answer it is a third party. It is through Mass CEC we will be selecting that technical consultant, but they will be a third party from us. That way they're able to provide a very high level of technical expertise as well as unbiased support for each community. So they will not be Mass CEC staff. So there was a question about how a community should go about considering what technology they might want to apply for. And that's a really fantastic question. I think the first thing is attending this webinar and learning about each individual technology, and keep those sort of, when we talked about good sites, consider if your community has a high prevalence of high cost heating fuels. Consider what type of community you live in. Is there more open space, or are you more of a city? So you want to keep those things in mind for, let's say, something like a ground source heat pump in terms of space. Other things you just might want to consider is what people may or may not be familiar with in each community, and have those conversations as well. Some communities, when they're considering a program, actually will put out a survey out to their community to ask some of those questions, because part of it is going to be what's best from a financial perspective, but it might also be something that communities are interested in as well. So I would also encourage communities to look at the website as well in more detail, look at the rebates, look at the economics, again, look at those best site options to see what, knowing your community and size and space, what may be a good fit. That's also an important thing for a municipal lighting plant that's not in the Renewable Energy Trust to take a look at as well, because you'll want to take a look and consider what types of rebates your municipality might offer as well, to keep in mind those types of economics. And if your community has any questions and wants any type of questions answered about what might be a good fit for this technology or that technology, reach out to us, and we'd be happy to provide any type of answer. So we haven't had any questions come in the last couple of minutes, but I think what we'll say at this point is we'll hang on the line for maybe another 5 minutes or so. We certainly don't want to make anyone stay if they've got to go. But if anybody has any other questions, feel free to send them in. Again, we'll hang out for another 5 minutes or so. And then again, what we'll do is we will be sending all these questions and answers out to everyone. Otherwise, again, visit the website or email heatsmartmaps@masscec.com, and we will certainly answer your questions directly as well. And those will also then, once the deadline comes up for the questions and answers, we will also be posting them to the website. All right, well, thank you everybody so much for joining us today. It doesn't look like we have any remaining questions. We appreciate your time and we look forward to hearing from you.